Captain's Log, Stardate 11601.29. Assignment Earth. A mysterious object from a Class M planet in the Alpha Quadrant is being transported by Shuttlecraft. An intergalactic time traveler. It brings a message of hope to all humanoid species. What's inside this crate has altered all our yesterdays and is taking us where no man or woman has gone before. Because this is Captain Kirk's command chair.
So check off, resume original course, warp factor 2.
Warp factor 2, sir.
Energize.
On Star Trek's 50th anniversary, two museums are in a race to restore its iconic artifacts.
This entire hull section could just split open like an egg.
Scientists are making the vision of Star Trek a reality.
Our playbook is basically the first season of Star Trek.
Earth Enterprise.
It's a pop culture phenomenon that changed history.
It was just a kissing scene.
Base is unstunned.
Star Trek is part of our cultural DNA.
And after 50 years, Star Trek is still inventing the future.
Fascinating.
The Starship Enterprise began its first 5-year mission on September 8, 1966. 50 years later, it's still going, with the third feature film of the rebooted Star Trek franchise.
Really want to head back out there, huh?
Carl Urban is Bones McCoy.
Part of what was so appealing about Star Trek back then is what is appealing about it today.
Dazzling display of logic.
You didn't think I had it in me, did you, Spock?
No, sir.
It's about this family, this dysfunctional family in space that don't always get on but have to work together.
I like them better than I like you.
Simon Pegg is co-writer of Star Trek Beyond and Scotty.
Star Trek is the one shining light which says, no, we're not going to destroy ourselves. We're going to continue and we're going to move out into the galaxy and be really handsome.
Today, scientists are making real the vision of Star Trek, unlocking the secrets of warp space and teleportation, revealing the mysteries of the Invisibility Cloak, and solving the riddle of the phaser and tricorder. All of these futuristic technologies were invented by a low-budget sci-fi show, the creation of Gene Roddenberry, which was canceled after just 3 seasons. The 11-foot studio model of the Starship Enterprise, which was used to film shots like these in the days before CGI, was donated to the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum, where it's been on and off display ever since. The museum's main entrance, the iconic Boeing Milestones of Flight Hall, is being revamped. Smithsonian curator Margaret Whitekamp wants the model of the Enterprise to be a centerpiece of this landmark exhibit.
I'm a fan. I love Star Trek. If we could have one object that tells the story of imagination and inspiration that's so important to spaceflight, to real spaceflight, it's got to be the Starship Enterprise.
The Enterprise should be there because it's the dream. The lander is there because it's the reality, but we wouldn't have gotten the reality without the dream.
To help with the conservation, Margaret has recruited her own Star Trek Brain Trust, a team of technical wizards who have worked on dozens of Star Trek feature films and series. Their challenge is to conserve the model for future generations without compromising its authenticity.
Just the wrong shape.
It's amazing to be this close to it.
I know.
As soon as we walk into the room, I could see that this was going to come together. And the excitement in the group was really just electric.
Before they knew anything of anything?
Adam Schneider is a specialist model collector and restorer.
You see this model there, he's like, oh my gosh, it's beautiful. Because remember, its function is to be beautiful. Its function is not to fly. Its function is to be attractive in the movie context.
Oh, really? Yeah.
So, you know, this is the...
But Margaret's worried it could fall apart at any moment.
The strength of these joints is something that I'm concerned about because the model is 50 years old. So we had a huge flake of paint that just cleaved off.
Gave up.
With the hall opening in just 4 months, it's now a race to get the model ready in time.
So we've got 4 months to get this project done, and so it's really important that we get cracking on this thing immediately.
Red alert.
For conservator Malcolm Collum, the Enterprise is an historic artifact. For physics professor David Greer, it provides a scientific blueprint of the future. In his laboratory at New York University, David is on a quest to make the galaxy's first working tractor beam.
We've seen it on TV, right? But can you imagine doing it for real?
John Sulu, activate tractor beam.
It's a Star Trek staple. With just the flick of a button, an invisible beam of energy called a tractor beam grabs hold of any passing object and pulls it aboard.
And everybody was saying, well, what will we do in the 23rd century? How will it look? And so they were having this great time inventing the 23rd century.
We love tractor beams, although you never saw a beam in the original show because they couldn't afford to put a beam. Turn on the tractor beam, and then the thing would somehow follow along.
I see it on the camera, but it looks like we're not going to set fire to anything. Okay, good.
A 50-year-old TV series makes it look effortless, but turning science fiction into science fact isn't quite so easy. David has discovered that a tractor beam is really a beam of light.
In my lab, we're working with light waves, and that turns out to be actually important if you want to work in space. What we realized, there was something we didn't understand. So we went back to the equations. We went back to figuring out how does light interact with matter.
It turns out the equation for a tractor beam is as impressive as this man's beard. The 19th century Scottish mathematician James Clerk Maxwell. His light bulb moment came with the discovery of light waves and the fact that light waves can push matter. Hidden within his equations was another mathematical prediction discovered by David.
It's really cool. What's new and special and surprising is that those equations have buried within them the prediction that you can create a wave that pulls. Okay, so here's the wave. What we showed is that you can re-express this as two terms. One term is...
If, as the equations predict, light waves can both push and pull.
Then you come out with just a very simple result that if
proving Star Trek got it right after all.
Then you have a tractor beam. Yeah, that was one of those special moments when you say, it's really good to be a scientist.
That's the theory. Back to the tractor beam lab to see it in action.
So this is what it takes to make a tractor beam. We start with an ordinary laser. The beam from the laser is then relayed off of this mirror to this device here. What you're seeing right here is going on in the optical table right now. It's happening live. We are actually manipulating objects. We're moving them around with the forces exerted by light.
David's beam still isn't ready to move something the size of a shuttlecraft.
To give you a sense of the scale, this TV screen here is about 1/4 the size of a human hair.
So it's a microscopic particle that can be pushed and pulled.
These small things moving in here are under Enrique's complete control. Now we're going to turn it into a tractor beam. Go for it. And here you go. You can see the pattern is squeezing down as the object moves toward us. That's a tractor beam. So they work. You can have them today in the lab.
With practice, David's tractor beams can not only pull and push, they can make particles dance in 3 dimensions.
It's just amazing that it works. From the equations to the TV screen.
In 10 years' time, David plans to take his tractor beam from the lab into space.
The idea is to use tractor beams to sample dust, ice crystals, microscopic matter from space. By gathering in that material and analyzing it, you can learn where we came from and perhaps where we're going.
It's not only scientists who have been inspired by Star Trek. Generations of fans have grown up with its vision of hope and optimism.
It's really a wonderful and inspiring vision of the future. It's how we should be.
Brooke Speck is a fan and also a curator at the EMP Museum in Seattle, North America's leading pop culture museum, which looks like it came straight out of science fiction. For the first time in nearly 50 years, Brooks wants to bring together authentic props from the original series of Star Trek and recreate the bridge of the Starship Enterprise. It's a plan as bold as Captain Kirk's.
So about here is where the center of the exhibition is going to be. This will be where we put Captain Kirk's command chair. This is our bridge, and we're going to build it out right around the chair. Throughout the exhibit, there's going to be over 100 objects on display, everything authentic, everything from Star Trek, actual costumes worn, actual props, the real thing. It'll all be here.
It's a once-in-a-lifetime exhibition, and Brooks has got just the next 4 months to make it happen. He's going to need one of these, one of these, and at least one of these. But Brooks's task isn't easy. After the show was canceled, most props were thrown in the dumpster. Only a very few survive, jealously guarded by collectors and Trekkies.
It's an ambitious plan, and we don't, at this point, have much time to do it in museum terms. So we have to work fast, really fast, to get this done.
The clock is now ticking for Brooks to find all the props he needs for his landmark exhibition. This is how we like to remember the Starship Enterprise.
Ingrained in my mind as a, 7, 8, 9, 10-year-old boy when the series was airing is the Starship Enterprise was everything great about humanity.
50 years later, it looks like it may have reached its final frontier. Malcolm Collum, chief conservator at the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum, already knew it was in bad shape, but now he's worried it could fall apart at any moment.
So if you look here, you can see here's an area where that glued seam is splitting, and it may be the result of the wooden structure having shifted or something. So the fact that the glue that's in here is 50 years old now, we obviously have concerns. I'm very concerned. I'm actually surprised that this crack hasn't propagated further. We've got cracking up here in this section here. If you see this area here, you've got some more of this flaking paint. The paint through here is just literally cleaving off in these large chips. And you can see the load from the weight of the engine nacelle dropping down has caused the wooden glue joint here to separate. So the fact that this crack is running across here is the biggest fear that I have, is that, this entire hull section could just split open like an egg.
It's a national icon that's just one dab of 50-year-old glue from disaster.
Yes, yeah, I'm having pangs of anxiety.
Go to warp 6.
The Enterprise is destined to take center stage at the National Air and Space Museum, alongside other icons such as the Spirit of St. Louis, Sputnik, and the Apollo Lunar Module.
It's a very big deal. This is the iconic space in the downtown building of the National Air and Space Museum. It is our introduction to the premier collection of aviation and space artifacts in the world. It will go right here so that as visitors come in, they're going to be greeted by the iconic saucer with the NCC 1701 of the Enterprise in its full glory, restored to what it would have looked like at the end of production in 1967.
Next to the Enterprise, in the Boeing Milestones of Flight Hall, will be 2 intermediate-range nuclear missiles from the Cold War, which is the kind of real-life issue the scriptwriters of Star Trek have never shied away from.
While the original premise of the show may have been, let's just have some adventures with a spaceship, very quickly it became social commentary as well.
This is a time when we were all very worried that we were going to die in a nuclear fire.
I think we told stories that made people go look for other answers, look at their world a different way, look at their neighbors a different way. I think we got people thinking.
The challenge with Star Trek was to rattle the bars of the cage, was to push the limit, you know, to be ambitious.
Outpost 4 reported under attack, sir.
In the episode A Balance of Terror, the Enterprise finds itself in Star Trek's version of a Cold War standoff.
Did Outpost 4 give anything at all on the attacking vessel, Lieutenant?
No identification, sir.
Just as the West distrusted the Soviet Union, at the far end of the galaxy, the Romulans were acting suspiciously.
All the villains in Star Trek were proxies for our villains, the real enemies at the time. The Romulans were sort of sneaking around and did everything sort of undercover, were duplicitous and untrustworthy, and all that was a reflection of how they were feeling about communism at the time.
The Blackbird SR-71 is one example of that distrust. Today, it's on display at the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum. In the 1960s, it was one of the United States' top-secret black projects, and one of the first military aircraft designed using stealth technology to avoid detection by enemy radar. But the Romulan bird of prey went one better. It wasn't just stealthy. It could disappear altogether using an invisibility cloak.
It was something that was used by the enemy, and maybe because it was a little underhand, a little less than valiant to kind of hide.
I don't see anything.
Invisibility is theoretically possible, Captain. Selective bending of light, but the power cost is enormous.
Inspired by Star Trek, scientists have been trying to make an invisibility cloak ever since.
Obviously, Star Trek is fiction, so it didn't actually specify how their cloak operated, otherwise we would have built one a long time ago.
So Professor John Howell and his team at the University of Rochester have made their own version. They call it the Rochester Cloak.
Is there a simple way to achieve cloaking without going into great expense or great difficulty in making the setup?
The answer turns out to be yes. And it all comes down to classic physics.
Invisibility is taking a light ray and bending it around an object so that it gets to the observer as if the object weren't there.
Imagine a Romulan who's up to no good. We can see he's up to no good because light waves travel in a straight line and bounce off him. But what if he could bend light waves? According to Einstein, one way of doing this is to warp space, using something like a black hole. John doesn't have a black hole in his lab, but he does have quite a lot of these.
We have the Rochester Cloak, which is 4 lenses, and they're set apart so that the light that comes in focuses, diverges, comes through, focuses, diverges, and comes through. The Rochester Cloak can hide an object, but also make it look transparent so that the whole thing appears as if it's not there.
Physics is not magic. It's only magic if you don't understand what's going on. It would be absolutely incredible to an 18th century person to see an iPhone. It would be totally magical.
The math required to get the position of the lenses just right is complex, but it's not new.
This technique is using old physics to do a simple imaging problem that maybe hadn't really been thought of.
Old sci-fi plus classic physics equals invisibility. Meanwhile, in Seattle, Brooke Speck has still got 5,000 square feet of empty exhibition space to fill. And 50-year-old Star Trek props are proving to be as elusive as the Romulan bird of prey.
After the show was canceled, it's hard to say exactly what happened to everything. A lot of the stuff was tossed out. The sets were taken apart, put in dumpsters.
The only things that were saved by actual people in the studio who said, oh, I want one of those, I'll take it home.
The model of the Enterprise was donated to the Smithsonian. But the film set was trashed. Back in 1969, Bill Ward was a grad student at UCLA.
Well, here we are at the back lot of the School of Theater, Film, and Television at UCLA, and I'm retracing the final voyage of the Starship Enterprise. This is where flatbed trucks deposited all of the sets from the original Star Trek. I remember the two sliding doors. They were quite magical in that they seemed to automatically open and close. When I looked at them, I found that there was a handle on each one so that a stagehand could pull it open and close it manually.
Captain, we're getting a signal from the spacecraft.
I remember Lieutenant Uhura's communications center was a sheet of 1/4-inch plywood, also painted gray, with some little things glued to it that didn't really do anything, but she pretended like it did and did a quite good job of that. I think if they had known how valuable this would have become, they would have held on to it because it would be worth a tremendous amount today.
Instead of which, the entire structure of 1/4-inch plywood flats was taken apart, piece by piece, and over the following decades, cannibalized for student productions.
Well, here we are in the School of Theater, Film, and Television scene shop. This is where the Enterprise was finally dismantled. It took several years to do it. It was used in student film production. There might be some pieces of it still here. Who knows?
But at least one item escaped the dumpster and the student productions. And for Brooks, it's the first piece to his 50th anniversary Star Trek puzzle. Star Trek was a cheap show with cheap props, and for all that, utterly believable.
When you watched it, as a fan, you never questioned it. You bought it. It was, your suspension of disbelief was complete. You were like, yeah, fine.
So this is a communicator. This is one of the actual props. It was probably used by everyone on the show at one point or another.
Enterprise to Captain Kirk. Come in, please.
Kirk, yeah, what is it, Enterprise?
This sort of speaker grill piece, that's actually a piece of paper there that's been printed on with those groovy lines.
Kirk here.
Back in the 60s, these guys are using little communicator devices, and you have a look at today, and most of us are walking around with these smartphones that can do all of that.
Kirk to Enterprise.
Enterprise.
I saw it on Star Trek, and so I could imagine that in my lifetime, we would have that.
Would these things have happened as quickly as they have without Star Trek? I think science and science fiction have this symbiotic relationship. Science fiction inspires scientists to invent what they see in science fiction.
But one communicator doesn't make a 50th anniversary Star Trek exhibition. Time for Brooks to hit that warp drive.
I found out from another Star Trek collector that there's a gentleman named Gerald who has a really, really important piece. Apparently, he has an original phaser. This is really mind-blowing because, as far as we know, there are only 2 phasers in existence, and I did not expect I'd be able to track one down.
Hey, Brooks, how are you?
It turns out there are Star Trek collectors, and there's Gerald.
Step right this way, bro.
Look at this. This is fantastic.
Oh, thank you so much. Hey, you can examine it if you like.
Okay, hang on. I can't, just a second. Very cool. It's light.
Yes.
You know, as a kid, you always imagine it's got this weight.
It's hollow fiberglass.
Wow. Well, you've taken great care of this. It's something I've wanted to do since I was 10. You know, it was like hold a phaser. That was really hard to like keep it cool and be all professional. You know, like yeah. When I was just there's this 9-year-old kid in me going, oh my goodness, the phaser. So, Gerald, what do you think? How would you feel about loaning it to us for a little while to display in the exhibition?
I will seriously consider.
Thank you. Thank you. I promise we would take excellent care of it.
Fire all phasers.
At heart, Star Trek has always been a good old-fashioned adventure that appeals to the kid in all of us.
I love Kirk as a swashbuckler and a gunslinger in the old American Western tradition.
Terribly fun, terribly cheesy. That's part of the hallmark. You pick up a phaser and it goes, ta-da!
But what happens if you've forgotten your phaser and you find you're being slowly hugged to death by a 7-foot angry green lizard called the Gorn?
Arena is a great episode. It's a mano-a-mano kind of fight. Looking back at it now, it's ridiculous because it's obviously a man in a suit moving incredibly slowly. He does this. And then Kirk ducks and then he does this.
And if you don't have a phaser, then you have to make the next best thing.
First, potassium nitrate. And now, if you can find some sulfur and a charcoal deposit.
Mix it all together, and what do you get?
Recall your basic chemistry, Doctor. Gunpowder.
When he learns to make gunpowder and creates a gun, and it's awesome.
He has reasoned it out.
But is it more than goofy fun? Can Star Trek really point us towards the weapons of the future? The answer is yes, according to laser scientist and Trek fan, Dr. Rob Apsel.
We're at the Lockheed Martin facility in Bothell, Washington, where we develop high-power lasers. And I'm going to take you into one of the typical laser development labs that we have here, where we turn ideas into reality. This is where we would try stuff out. We have tools, test equipment. It's early thinking. This is where those initial ideas, we begin to think them out, see how they can actually be turned into experiments, measure the experiments, and see if those ideas are real. Once that's proven out, we can then begin to engineer them into a solution, engineer them into a device.
By combining laser beams using fiber optics, Rob can now increase their power output exponentially.
A laser that we would develop for defensive purposes would be 1,000 to 100,000 times more powerful than this one.
Rob's goal is to create a defensive weapon as powerful as Star Trek's phaser.
So how could we actually make a phaser? Well, when I look at a device like this, the first thing I think about is the energy, the power that's required to get the phaser effect. The next breakthrough would come from being able to store enough energy in a device like this so that you could project that beam and get your effect.
And how close is Rob to achieving this? Well, take a look at this.
You see the rocket launch. At this point, the laser weapon system has to acquire the rocket, track it, put the high-energy laser beam onto it, and that white spot there is an actual reflection of the high-energy laser beam on the rocket, overheating the warhead, causing it to explode.
Tested on the firing range, Lockheed Martin's prototype laser defense system is undergoing further development in the lab before deployment on the battlefield. Before Rob came along, the energy required to do this required a generator the size of this, or even this, making it as mobile as your average Gorn. But Rob's lasers are now small enough to be deployed on the battlefield for real.
As you can see, the complete laser weapon system is able to be carried on the back of a flatbed truck.
Okay, so still not phaser size. But Rob's not one to argue with.
And of course, it's very difficult to predict the future, but I would never bet against science.
Back in Seattle, Brooks has found a friend.
Hello, Gorn. Check him out.
In the lab, it's time for the serious conservation work to begin.
The Star Trek Enterprise model is receiving the same standards of care that we would give to any artifact in the museum's collection. And we are taking what we know about historic artifacts and really bringing that to this cultural artifact.
At the Star Trek convention in Las Vegas, the fans want to know what exactly Margaret and her team are doing to their starship.
They love the show and they just can't get enough.
I'm thrilled to be here, and because there's so much knowledge in this room, and there's so much
So I think the whole restoration team knows that there are millions of fans who are watching this.
I'm curious who is going to actually do the paint restoration.
Did you guys find any, to use a Star Trek term, microfractures on the hull?
Do you have a backup plan to compensate for that?
We are concerned. You definitely see cracking the engineering. I feel a responsibility to the fans because I'm a fan.
While Margaret lays out her plan of action to the fans, back at the Smithsonian, the moment of truth has arrived for Chief Conservator Malcolm Collum. To save the Enterprise for the fans, he's going to have to take her apart. At the EMP Museum in Seattle, curator Brooke Speck is taking delivery of the most iconic prop of them all, and the centerpiece of his 50th anniversary exhibition, recreating the bridge of the Starship Enterprise.
This is Captain Kirk's command chair.
This is Captain James Kirk of the USS Enterprise.
This is the heart of it all. This is where Kirk sits and guides his ship, guides his crew.
Staying with us.
Faces down evil aliens. Seduces pretty women.
His relationship with women was something that I wouldn't always expect to be what happens with a captain.
This super brash, super confident, cocky.
I want some answers to all this.
Rebel who everyone just loves because he's just a little bit naughty.
Suave, brilliant.
Not only do we have your psychokinetic ability, but at twice your power level.
Go with his gut.
That settles that.
Great leader.
You won't get it through torture.
Driven beyond belief.
I want that third alternative.
He was the glue that held that show together because you admired Captain Kirk, and you had to love Captain Kirk or the show doesn't work.
Most people who want to play Star Trek when they're 10 years old want to be Captain Kirk. It just seems like the best job.
Better even than a museum curator.
Of course, that 11-year-old Brooks that watched Star Trek as a kid, I would love to see what it feels like to really sit in that chair.
Tempting, isn't it?
I never, ever will. It's an object that we have to protect. We are the stewards of this chair. And so, no sitting.
He's got no time for sitting on his laurels either. He's got as many original props to find as there are triples in the ventilation ducts. As for Malcolm Collum, it doesn't get any more nerve-wracking than this.
I certainly feel that we do feel for the ship. The more time that you spend with these characters, the more you care for them. I remember as a boy watching the first time I saw the Enterprise destroyed in a movie, and it had an impact. And then they destroyed it in quite a few movies.
If Malcolm thinks his model is in bad shape, he should take a look at this one. This was the Galileo, The Star Trek Shuttlecraft, discovered in a parking lot by Trek fan and model collector Adam Schneider, who took it upon himself to restore it.
I think every now and then someone has to take a bullet for the team. Galileo was a mess. There was raccoon debris in the back, a few dead animals in the back. So it was in terrible shape, absolutely terrible shape.
Now it's on display at Space Center Houston, the official visitor center for NASA's Johnson Space Center.
This thing came along and is absolutely a labor of love. There is many thousands of dollars expended to get it fixed up and no financial benefit whatsoever.
As any Star Trek fan will tell you, there is more than one kind of space shuttle. While NASA's engineers were developing a real space shuttle, this guy was building the model of the Galileo. And he ain't no rocket scientist neither.
My name is Gene Winfield, and I've been building custom cars and movie cars for over 70 years. I love to do things that are different, things that are just unusual. I love it.
The interesting thing about it is that it sparked a lot of energy and attention because at that time, this is built in 66, aired at the beginning of 67, we didn't have a space shuttle.
Both space shuttles, real and imagined, are designed to tackle the same technical challenge: how to get astronauts to or from the surface of a planet and back again.
2, 1, and liftoff of Space Shuttle Atlantis.
Think of something that's about the size of a small bus and nothing that you'd ever think would fly. It looked like it was futuristic because you didn't see classical wings.
I love Star Trek from day one, you know, and I just love all kinds of modern things that are happening and futuristic things. I just love it.
But just as the real shuttle was an expensive way of getting astronauts into space, the special effects needed for Gene's model also proved too much for a lo-fi sci-fi show.
There just was no budget available on a TV show in the 60s to show a shuttlecraft leaving the ship and flying down to a planet and landing every week. They just didn't have that kind of money to shoot that many shots.
Energized. Which is the origin of the mother of all futuristic plot devices, the transporter.
As a narrative device, it's brilliant because you can go from one place to the next very, very quickly. And it's a genius piece of inventive writing and also feels very science fiction, you know, the matter transfer. But in Star Trek, you buy it because it's the future and things like that exist in the future.
We were making it up as we went along. That transporter beam, no, I don't believe it. Energized.
And he was the one writing this stuff. But this guy believes it, and he's one of NASA's top research engineers.
When the detector switches...
At the Jet Propulsion Lab in Pasadena, California, Francesco Marsili has created the world's most sensitive photon detector.
So this is a fridge. This is a...
Not just any old fridge, but part of NASA's very own teleporter.
The filament, you can see a dark spot at the center of the chip. And that is the active area of the detector. That's where the photons are absorbed and transduced into electrical pulses.
Fascinating. NASA's teleporter operates at the scale of the subatomic quantum world, where strange things can happen.
We teleported the state of a photon, which is a very, very small particle.
Imagine Francesco is a photon, a fundamental particle of light. In other words, he's small.
Very, very small. Very small. It's 1/1,000,000th of a meter.
Now imagine lots of mini-sized Francesco photons. And this is where it starts to get really weird. At the level of the quantum universe, any two particles can become entangled.
Two entangled particles are so intimately linked that if you change the state of a particle, the state of the other entangled particle changes too, even though the two particles are very far apart, even if it's kilometers away, miles away. Quantum is very weird. Einstein called it spooky action at a distance, which is what it actually is.
Okay, so much for photons. But teleporting real people is more problematic.
A little scary when you think about it, having all your molecules turned into energy and shot down this ray to millions of miles away. You've got to trust that that's going to work. I mean, we put our trust in something which basically minces you.
It's one of the great mysteries of science fiction. What does happen to the original Kirk? Does he still exist? Or is the new Kirk a clone?
You don't have to explain it. In fact, it's very easy when you think about it as a concept. You're in one place, this force field kind of takes you apart, puts you back together again, and Bob's your uncle.
We're not teleporting Captain Kirk because the teleportation shown in Star Trek transfers matter. And what we actually did was to just teleport the state of a photon, meaning you can think about it as the color, a property of a photon, the color of a photon from point A to point B. But there was no transfer of matter in between the 2 points. We've achieved quantum teleportation.
Fascinating.
And yes, Francesco does have a little scientific crush on you-know-who.
Spock.
Have a blip on the motion sensor, Captain.
The reason why I like him is because of the Vulcans. They are advanced, they're a logical mind.
Lost them, Captain.
It's like the perfect scientist.
This is Spock's tunic. I'm trembling a little. So you can see with the collar up here, it's a little bit frayed, looks like it's been repaired, but really, it's in excellent shape. This, like all the original series uniforms, it's so important and it's so emblematic of Star Trek, and it's really, really precious.
Steady on 111 Mark 14. Back on their original course, Captain.
Spock, obviously logical, a science geek.
The odds against you and I both being killed are 2,228.7 to 1.
But also someone who you would want at your right hand.
And this insane torture chamber.
Fans of Star Trek have a great affection for Spock because I think he's a wonderfully noble version of the nerd that we all secretly are.
Beneath that, there is a raging human in Spock, absolutely.
And hidden in these boxes at a little-known Star Trek archive is the secret of Mr. Spock, the man, not the Vulcan. In the UCLA Library's Special Collections Department, Peggy Alexander is keeper of some of the original fan letters sent to Leonard Nimoy, the actor who played Spock and passed away in 2015.
Leonard Nimoy started getting much more fan mail than the other stars of the show, including William Shatner.
Fascinating.
The first week, we got a bag of mail, okay. Second week, we got several bags of mail. Third and fourth week, it got coming in so fast and so much, we had to hire a mail service to handle it.
Dear Mr. Roddenberry, I would like to say that I enjoy that wonderful program of yours, Star Trek. That is one of my favorite shows. And I don't mean to try to tell you how to run the program, but speaking for many teenage girls here in Virginia, please let Leonard Nimoy, Mr. Spock, do more leading parts. He's sexy.
Is Spock sexy? Absolutely.
A whole lot of young women thought so.
I love Mr. Spock. He's the greatest thing to hit TV.
When you can't get something, there's an attraction there.
Please don't change Mr. Spock.
He's simultaneously compelling and unavailable.
You wouldn't change his personality, would you? I'd probably die if you did.
Don't go for the unavailable guys. They're gonna break your heart. Spock is always breaking hearts.
At the EMP Museum, Brooke Speck now has less than 2 months to recreate the original bridge of the Starship Enterprise from scratch. Kirk's command chair? Check. Phaser, on loan? Check. Communicator, Check. And hipster earpiece? Check.
Captain, we're getting a signal from the spacecraft.
It belonged to the most groundbreaking fictional character of the 23rd, or indeed any other century. Lieutenant Uhura.
The symbol repeat.
This is one of the funkier pieces of Star Trek design. It has a real 60s look about it. Unlike so many TV props, which when you look up close, you say, oh, I can tell this is a prop. This is cool technology all the way down. It never stops looking completely real and completely convincing.
Hailing frequencies open, sir.
Hailing frequencies open, Captain. I'm Nichelle Nichols, and I played Lieutenant Uhura in Star Trek.
Contact established, Captain.
Enterprise, Kirk here.
Seeing someone like Lieutenant Uhura on that stage, you know, he's right behind the captain's shoulder, was a big thing. You know, I felt I could probably do that too.
Well, she's the most important person on the bridge. When Lieutenant Uhura says captain, everybody turns around to look. You cannot help but fall in love with her.
Starfleet Command extends greetings to Commissioner Beale of the planet.
And remember, this wasn't really the 23rd century. It was the 1960s, at the height of the civil rights movement and the struggle for racial equality.
Security sweeps of all decks are negative, Mr. Spock.
Just the vision of her on the bridge as a member of the crew was such a powerful message to African Americans at the time of what might be possible.
Analysis sector.
I didn't see any other women playing roles like that when I was growing up. You know, they had either some domestic job, they might have been an actress or a dancer.
African Americans saw the show and went, what? You know, like, we're on TV.
She presented a totally sort of out-of-the-box opportunity for us to think, hey, that might be possible.
There were Southern stations that told NBC, well, we're not going to run the show because you have a black woman on the bridge. And Gene Roddenberry told NBC, tell them to go to hell. Pardon my language, but that's exactly what he said.
There's a place for you on the Starship Enterprise. We're all going to the stars, not some of us, not just white men. We are all going.
There were many little girls, black, white, yellow, brown, red, green, wanted to be Uhura, loved Uhura.
But thanks to Nichelle and the work she subsequently did with NASA, the door was now firmly open for May Jemison to become NASA's first African-American female astronaut.
Dr. May Jemison, of course, is a hero, shiro for me.
I recruited the first women and minority astronauts for the Space Shuttle program. I really am proud of that, because at that time, people were saying, it'll never happen, you know? And I said, well, it already happened.
I'm getting no signal from it, sir.
It turns out that for the Chief Communications Officer of the Starship Enterprise, there's communicating, and then there's communicating.
I would see you so busy at your command.
This is a very important episode in both Star Trek history and television history, because in it, Captain Kirk, William Shatner, kisses Lieutenant Uhura. And this is one of the first, most famous interracial kisses on TV. And at the time in the 60s, this was considered a very big deal.
It was just a kissing scene.
In its day, this was an incredibly controversial thing to show on television. After it aired, everyone waited to see what will the reaction be? Will there be any complaints? There were none whatsoever.
I said, well, it's just two people like my grandmother and grandfather. He said, what do you mean your grandmother, grandfather? And I said, well, Grandpa was white and Grandma was black.
We are on a peaceful mission in this part of the galaxy. We have no hostile intentions.
Resolving conflict through communication was at the heart of the Star Trek vision. And scientists have been following Star Trek's lead ever since. In the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum, there is a mock-up of Voyager 1. Launched in 1977, it's one of the first space probes to leave our solar system. And in case it's ever found by intelligent aliens, scientists attached a golden record with greetings recorded in 55 different human languages.
And it was a very simple message to whoever might find this, a message in a bottle, if you will, of who humanity is.
And it simply translates its findings into English.
In the 23rd century, galactic harmony was achieved by breaking out the Universal Translator, a handy device, especially if you don't like reading subtitles.
We wish to talk to you. That you can speak to anybody in the galaxy because you have this thing. And you don't really question how it works, and it's not your position or place to know how it works. You're not a scientist, you're a television watcher.
And it simply
Or maybe you're a museum curator, desperate to turn up missing props.
Approximation of whatever the creature is. That's the Universal Translator. And this is the one episode in Star Trek where we actually see the device. No one knows where that prop is. I really wish that prop had survived and we could display it, but that one's gone.
Universal ideas and concepts common.
Star Trek's version of a Universal Translator might look like a toilet roll wrapped up in aluminum foil. But behind the shiny plate glass windows of Google HQ, the computers are in overdrive in a race to create a Universal Translator of their own. In order to translate this,
coffee with sugar but no milk, please.
Google's computers have been scanning the web for every document that has been translated, learning over 100 languages, so you can order a skinny shot latte in Russian.
Кофе с молоком, но без сахара, пожалуйста.
Companion, try to understand. Our goal is to just, like in Star Trek, just speak freely, and the mobile phone, Google Translate, automatically identifies the language you speak.
But Google wants to do more than its own version of the Universal Translator. It wants to boldly go where not even Star Trek ever went.
Explore strange new worlds.
At Google HQ, their mission is to seek out new translations like you've never seen them before.
What I really want to do is I want to make a window into a world that's in your language. So you can take your phone, you can hold it up, and just wherever you point it, everything is in your language. So what I have here is a camera hooked up to my computer. It tries to find little blobs that are generally the same color. And these little blobs tend to be letters. And there's a lot of different kinds of blobs. Like it finds a lot of stuff in my zipper here, and it thinks there's letters there. It thinks there's letters in my hair. And so now we got to do a process of refining this and trying to eliminate what's actually a letter and what's not a letter. Yeah, I have fun at my job. This is the truth. It's kind of a weird looking filter. That's my angry face. Ah!
This is what Octavio can now do with it.
Choose Russian to English, click the camera, and see what this says. 5-year mission.
And he makes it look effortless.
Explore strange new worlds. A lot of hard work just sitting on my couch. I don't know if that maybe doesn't sound like hard work, but just sitting on my couch trying to figure out how to make this thing work.
And it's faster than the blink of an eye.
That takes a couple milliseconds.
But not as fast as warp speed. Just yet.
Смело идти туда, где раньше не был ни один человек.
To boldly go where before was not a single person.
Apparently, whether you're on Alpha Centauri or planet Earth, there is one universal language.
Across all languages, the top 3 translated phrases are thank you, how are you, and I love you.
We can speak the same language or a different language with one another. We're human beings, and we're proud of it. I know I am.
Bridge to Captain. Captain. That mechanical beastie is up here.
On my way, Scotty.
For all its serious intent, Star Trek was also great fun.
Star Trek can be wonderfully campy. There's a strain of humor that comes along with taking some of the science, taking some of the politics seriously, that makes it fun television and not just, eating your vegetables or watching the news.
The renovated Boeing Milestones of Flight Hall is just weeks from completion, and the race is on to get the model of the Enterprise ready in time.
The Enterprise deserves to be in the same space and in conversation with these other artifacts.
But in the space dock of the Conservation Lab, the model is still in pieces. Conservators Malcolm Collum and Ariel O'Connor are going to have to give her all she's got to make her structurally sound. They're discovering old wiring and electrics, which could pose real long-term problems.
It's a TV problem. It's made out of old automobile lights doing the lighting. The Christmas tree lights doing the blinking thing. The reality is very different than the beautiful thing you saw on TV.
The plan is to replace the old incandescents with modern LEDs.
People really want a beautiful Enterprise that lights up and looks great.
We've been tasked with this model not catching on fire. So that's an important thing, I think.
We're utilizing a borescope to get into the far reaches of the saucer, primarily because we can't take the saucer apart. Originally, it was composed of 2 large sections, which were then glued together.
All right, so you're on the starboard light.
And I'm following this hidden channel that we can't get our hands into, and using a borescope to reach down to the far outer edge and see where this light fixture is.
Reaching it is one thing. Removing it is another.
So we're trying to figure out how to carefully remove that light fixture without damaging anything.
Holding the original light.
The fate of the most iconic starship of them all now rests with Malcolm and his borescope. But the Enterprise isn't the only spaceship the Smithsonian is conserving. Ariel O'Connor is also working on the Apollo Lunar Module.
Many people don't realize that the Star Trek Starship Enterprise filming model and the Apollo Lunar Module are contemporaneous spacecraft. So they were both built in the 1960s during a period of time where fictional space exploration is becoming reality. The Enterprise model and the Lunar Module don't look like each other, but they're more similar to each other than anything else that's in this Milestones of Flight gallery. They're both engineering marvels of their time. They were built without precedent. They were both designed without the need for aerodynamics.
The Enterprise is a very different design than the undifferentiated flying saucers or pointy rockets that you would have seen in 1950s science fiction. And the Lunar Module is a really innovative bit of engineering, thinking about what exactly did they need to get human beings safely to the lunar surface and get them back safely, and no more. So not 1 ounce more of cladding on the outside, no streamlining because it wasn't needed, no seats because it saved them weight and allowed them to have smaller windows.
And there was a ladder that would have, the hatches there, they would have extended and climbed down on a ladder. So Neil Armstrong would have taken his first step on the moon right here.
It's 1 small step for man, 1 giant leap for mankind.
There is a moment around the actual space landing, the first landing on the moon, when the whole world does turn and pay attention to this singular human achievement.
The first moon landing happened just about 6 weeks after the original series ended. So I see that as like this culmination of, you have 3 years of Star Trek and all this vision of the future, and then boom, people go to the moon. I mean, how could people at the time have not been thinking, yeah, it's happening, Star Trek is coming?
Star Trek was the dream, but the Apollo mission was the reality. And when Neil Armstrong landed on the moon, I mean, I wasn't the only one. There were a lot of us in tears of joy.
It was an extraordinary time. We had fans among the Apollo astronauts. If Star Trek can do it, we can do it.
It seemed almost like an inevitable future. Yes, we're gonna keep going out there. We're gonna head into space. We're going to explore. There will be ships. There will be heroes like this.
Meet one of today's heroes, Terry Virts, a NASA astronaut who's notched up over 200 days in space, but he can barely remember the moon landings.
It has been a long time since we've been to the moon. I've been an astronaut for a while already, and when I was a kid, even then Apollo was already history.
At the foot of the ladder, the lamp.
Apollo's mission control, which in 1969 guided Neil Armstrong onto the surface of the moon, is today carefully preserved at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas, a relic of the space race.
Very fine-grained as you get close to it.
In some ways, we can say that we have been to the moon, but we, meaning the current crowd of engineers and technicians and astronauts, have not been to the moon. That was a long time ago.
Within the next 2 decades, NASA's ambition is to send astronauts to Mars.
3, 2, 1, fire.
We have ignition of NASA's Space Launch System.
To get there, NASA is testing the next generation of prototype rockets, the Space Launch System, or SLS.
The SLS will be the most powerful rocket ever launched into space. I have a feeling that seeing SLS will be the most awesome rocket launch ever.
Even using boosters this big, it will still take us around 8 months to reach Mars. And if we were to keep on going, another 80,000 years to reach our nearest star system. Of course, the Enterprise didn't rely on any rockets.
Warp technology allows a starship to go faster than light, and that is essential if you're going to explore and travel interstellar distances and not have it take hundreds and hundreds or thousands of years.
If you could get somewhere in minutes or hours or even days or weeks, you can do a lot. And so propulsion is really the one thing that can make really exotic space travel possible in the future.
Original course, warp factor 2.
Warp factor 2, sir.
We didn't know what 7 was or what warp was, but we did know that it was faster than 5. And that was kind of enough of an explanation. Oh, 7 is really fast.
It's like when you put your car into sport mode, drive really fast.
I don't particularly understand it, and I'm in charge of the engine room at the moment. It just means you go fast, and that's all you need to know.
Warp factor 8.
Of all the imagined technologies of Star Trek, warp speed is the one that is still out of our reach.
At present speed, our ETA is 3 hours, 4 minutes, sir.
Is it even scientifically possible? The answer to that one is a resounding no, but also a possible maybe.
Unfortunately, physics limits us to the speed of light, and our current technology limits us to way much less than the speed of light.
According to Einstein, nothing can travel faster than the speed of light. But if you could warp space-time, you could get from here to there, not just fast, but instantaneously. And a tool for warping space may actually exist. Gravitational waves. 100 years after Einstein predicted their existence, at the LIGO Observatory in Louisiana, they're now being detected for the very first time. It's a worldwide collaboration of more than 1,000 scientists and engineers, including operations manager Richard Oram, who, when he's not making the scientific discovery of the century, likes to watch reruns of Star Trek.
I've watched all of them multiple times, at least 4 or 5 times. But I've never considered myself to be a Trekkie. But I'm beginning to realize that perhaps I might be.
Richard is LIGO's answer to the Enterprise's chief engineer, Scotty.
The ship's not structured to take that speed for any length of time.
He's the guy who you can depend on in a bad time to get the job done.
Ooh, I don't know about that. It's going to take this long when really he can probably do it in a bit shorter, but he's given himself the room to make mistakes, you know.
A brilliant engineer, a man who, if he could, would bend the laws of physics to fulfill your needs.
We can't maintain warp rate speed much longer. Pressures are approaching the critical point.
Richard's job is to keep his laser interferometer running smoothly.
This is the largest volume ultra-high vacuum system in the world. It goes 2.5 miles all the way down to the XN station. It's an incredible feat of engineering.
This giant space observatory has detected the collision of 2 massive black holes, an event that occurred halfway across the universe and created a gravitational wave, a ripple in space-time that was detected by Richard's interferometer.
We're only really at the very starting point of understanding gravitational waves. But it's not too far-fetched to, from that starting point to think, well, if we can understand them, we can maybe learn how to use them.
If we can detect gravitational waves, could we one day harness them and warp space-time ourselves to reach the furthest corners of the galaxy?
In theory, warp drive is just not possible. The theoreticians can say that it breaks the physics that we know today. I guess as an engineer, I kind of view that as a challenge, I suppose.
Speed, Mr. Chekhov. We're moving at warp rate.
In Star Trek, all Mr. Chekhov had to do with the navigation console was press a button to put Enterprise into warp speed. And inside this crate is that same console. One of the centerpieces of Brooke Speck's 50th anniversary exhibition at the EMP Museum of Pop Culture.
Mr. Chekhov, deflector shields on full. On cruise, lock on target.
He was like a sort of pop star Russian. To see this character who was extremely attractive and loyal and not at all a bushy-eyebrowed communist.
Mr. Chekhov.
He was a part of the team.
Full stop, Mr. Chekhov. Hold your position.
The console hasn't been on public display for nearly 25 years. So, for the first time in a generation, get ready to see something not that special.
I was really surprised how much was missing, and I thought, oh no, what have we got here? I mean, what's left? Wow. I knew it was in a bad way. I didn't know it was quite this bad.
Energize all satellites.
Affirmative. Wow, is it ever scratched up?
Yeah.
Helm, give us warp speed.
When I first saw it, I felt this dread. I thought, cripes, this is not going to work out.
I was like, wow, that needs a lot of work. It was, ooh.
It will take months. It's not like you can just run out to the hardware store and pick up these pieces. How did it get so banged up, though? That's the part I keep coming back to. It's like, what do people... Yeah, but what does that mean, use? What did someone do?
I don't know. You never know how it was stored before.
Yeah, there's a lot missing. There's missing switches, missing lights, missing buttons.
Just weeks till opening, and suddenly Brooks has a 50-year-old console to conserve and a lot of replacement blinking lights to find.
This is, I don't want to say overwhelming, but it's pretty close.
Before the model of the Enterprise can be reassembled, the Smithsonian's conservation team is faced with a dilemma. What color to paint it?
What color is the Enterprise? It's a tricky question because it's not one flat color. The original paint had many layers, base coats and top coats, and then they added weathering effects during the series.
It's the kind of dilemma that gives a Smithsonian curator sleepless nights.
I've been working for months to put all of this together. It's exhausting because you're just mentally on every minute of the day making decisions. What about this? What about that? This is an object with such a complex history and such a passionate fan base who are so wonderful about really paying attention to the details that we really wanted to make sure that we got this right.
Even though we're doing spectroscopic analysis, even though we're doing paint analysis, even though we've literally microscopically bored in to get the right colors, there were fans out there who are watching and loving and expecting it to look like what they saw, and they will be very pleased and very happy. And some fans will hate it.
At the EMP Museum of Pop Culture, Kirk's command chair is taking center stage once more. And for the first time in nearly half a century, the props and costumes that escaped the dumpster are being brought together for Brooks's 50th anniversary Star Trek exhibition. The set is an ambitious one. And in the workshop, the design crew are in a race to complete it in time. The clock is ticking for Brooks.
This is a model we created of the exhibition space. So everything you see here We're actually going to carve out of styrofoam and then plaster and paint, making these gigantic rock formations. In some ways, a lot like they did in the original series. I mean, you saw a lot of styrofoam rocks in Star Trek, and we're bringing it back. This is a lot of work. Any one of these rock plinths takes about 12 hours to construct, start to finish. So we have a lot of pieces to do, a lot of work to be done.
Captain Kirk's mission is not only to explore strange new worlds of styrofoam, but to seek out new life as well. And he's always bound by Star Trek's prime directive, the idealistic principle of non-interference with alien civilizations.
Our prime directive specifically prohibits us from any interference.
The characters you see on Star Trek are wrestling with the same issues that we wrestle with every day in our life, but they do it better.
That very idealistic, maybe slightly naive idea that we could just go out and everyone would just join in with us and we'd all be very kumbaya and sort of hold hands around the galaxy.
At NASA HQ in downtown Washington, D.C., Dr. Cassie Conley hasn't met any aliens yet. But if she does, it's her job to implement NASA's own version of the Prime Directive.
As a planetary protection officer, I'm responsible for making sure that missions NASA sends out don't contaminate other planets with Earth life, and that really is a form of the Prime Directive.
If we detect life on another planet, it will probably be here at NASA's Mission Control at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. Squint your eyes a bit, and you could be on the bridge of the Starship Enterprise.
We get to do what we all grew up watching on TV, you know, with Star Trek, of course, and I get to be the science officer. Can't be anything better than that.
Ashwin is the project scientist for NASA's Mars Curiosity rover mission, which landed on the Red Planet in August of 2012.
So we had this dramatic entry. We came in screaming through the atmosphere. So much of your life is riding on it. You've already put in, 8, 9 years working on this mission, designing it, building it, testing it, falling in love with it, really. And it was over before you knew it, and people were jumping up and down, and I had to just take a moment to realize, I can't believe we actually, we're here. We did it.
And now Ashwin's real work begins, the search for life on Mars.
Looking for life goes way beyond just science. It's a question of humanity. It's a question of knowing whether there's anybody else like us out there.
And is there anybody out there?
I think it would be naive and somewhat ignorant of us to believe that we're the only form of life to exist.
I'm quite positive there's life on Mars. We know there's life on Mars.
But it's not like the aliens in Star Trek.
We know there's life on Mars because it's on the spacecraft we brought with us. So those spacecraft all had Earth organisms, somewhere embedded inside the spacecraft. It's not very much. It's about as much per spacecraft as is on one of your hands. But there's some Earth life already on Mars.
We're spreading our germs across the universe like tribbles.
Aye, they're into the machinery, all right.
Dr. McCoy.
One man who knows all about the uncontrollable spread of alien life forms is the writer of The Trouble with Tribbles, David Gerald.
Always before in science fiction, the alien was something ugly. So that was how we knew it was a menace. It was ugly. What if the alien was so cute we didn't recognize it was a menace until it was too late?
Close that door.
And in fact, there are organisms that live on the cheese in your fridge. They are in your mouth right now, that as long as they were protected from the ultraviolet light and had a little bit of liquid on the surface of Mars, at Mars pressure, Mars soil conditions, they would grow on Mars. So Earth life can grow on Mars if it's got an umbrella and a cold drink.
12 months ago, the Starship Enterprise looked like an aging Hollywood actress who had seen better days. Now she's been taken apart, probed, painted, and polished. With only a week to go before she's installed, the team hopes she's ready for her close-up. At the Conservation Lab at the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum, it's taken months of work. Now, every light fixture, every brushstroke, every moving part has been lovingly and expertly conserved.
We know down to the micron that we have the decals in the right places, the windows are exactly right, all of the detailing that makes the Enterprise, we have in the right place. The Enterprise model is a genuine 1960s television star. It shouldn't surprise me, given that this is a model that was built for television, but it just shows up so beautifully on camera.
And for Chief Conservator Malcolm, it's a job well done.
It's not going to fall apart, at least not in my lifetime.
Her final voyage will be to the Boeing Milestones of Flight Hall in downtown D.C. At the EMP Museum of Pop Culture, Brooks's quest is also nearing completion. This is the last prop that he needs.
This is a tricorder from Star Trek. This is an original prop. You would have seen this used by Spock, also Dr. McCoy. A tricorder is it's a multifunction device. It's a computer, it's a scanner, it's an analyzer, it's a sensor. It's used for science, for medicine, all kinds of things. It is like an iPad on steroids.
It was another brilliant plot device which enabled people to explain things by looking at oh yeah, this is that.
And how does it work exactly?
No idea.
It is an incredibly futuristic idea. I mean, this technology is still way beyond us.
But maybe not for long. Because this guy thinks the future really is within our grasp.
When you have the target of where you want to go, what you want to do, asking the world to say, that over there, that technology, that accomplishment, why hasn't someone done it?
The Xprize Foundation, founded by Peter, launched the private space industry with its offer of a $10 million prize to the first commercial craft to reach space. It now hangs in the Boeing Milestones of Flight Hall. Today's $10 million prize will be awarded to the team that can invent one of these. Not a prop, but one that actually works.
I like to say the day before something is truly a breakthrough, it's a crazy idea.
Sonny Coley isn't crazy. He's an intensive care doctor. But he did grow up in the 70s watching reruns of Star Trek.
As I walk into the hospital, the automatic door opens. You know, throwback to Star Trek. I'm walking up the stairs to the ICU. I've been speaking with them with my communicator device, thinking to myself, like, we're already here. These guys saw it coming.
Sonny works at one of Canada's biggest and most modern hospitals. And his dream is to diagnose all kinds of illnesses with a little handheld device like they did on Star Trek.
How is he? Severe heart damage. Signs of congestion in both lungs.
I remember watching this as a kid, and it's just, I was never thinking I'd be a doctor at the time, but it's just amazing entertainment.
Internal injuries. Bleeding in the chest and abdomen.
Mr. Spock is using the tricorder device to diagnose McCoy's current state of affairs, and he's telling us that his heart is severely damaged, that his lungs are filling up with fluid, that his internal organs are all damaged, and that his blood pressure is dropping, and he's going into circulatory collapse, which is amazing for that little handheld device.
A signal, Captain.
So when Peter says,
that should be possible, why don't we have a tricorder?
Guess Sonny's reaction.
And I was like, come again? There's actually a Tricorder Xprize competition? And I said, sure, I'd love to sign up.
Because who wouldn't want to be the physician of the future?
I'll do everything I can, Jim, to save him.
I think one of the things that appeals to me the most about him is that he has got the most appalling bedside manner.
Listen, I don't need I'm still Chief Medical Officer of the Enterprise. I'll tell you what you need and when you need it.
But underneath that, he's one of the most altruistic human beings that you can find, and he loves all species.
There's nothing disgusting about it. It's just another life form, that's all.
The fans got it about him instantly.
It was close, Jim. We both barely got back alive. Unless the formula works, we can't risk it again.
Dr. McCoy is a very compassionate, emotional voice, and he argues from the heart. And who wouldn't fall in love with that?
Sonny, the 21st century Dr. McCoy, now heads up a team competing with others from around the world in a race to invent a working tricorder.
The real passion for me is taking this to the home or to places in underdeveloped nations that they don't have anything at all.
We're going to be short millions of doctors in the world. And you can't build enough medical schools or hospitals or teach enough doctors to meet the needs of the rising billion. But the tricorder can meet those needs. And this device needs to be something that you can speak to. It's got artificial intelligence on the cloud. And in success, it can diagnose you initially in about 15 different diseases as good or better than a board-certified doctor.
I think it does that.
This is how Sonny's version of the tricorder works.
So just imagine you're at home. You don't feel very well. It's flu season. You're like, what's going on with me? So I put this on, and the two things on the front here help pick up your electrical impulses from your heart. This piece in your ear detects your temperature and also detects an artery in the ear and picks up the pulse from that artery to help diagnose how fast you're breathing, what the oxygen levels are in your blood. The first thing it may tell me is that I have a fever, that my breathing rate is high, that my blood pressure is quite low, that I'm starting to develop sepsis or an infection in my bloodstream. All of those things are clues to that you don't just have the flu, you're actually progressing to full-blown pneumonia. You need to be seen.
Like any medical diagnostic device, each tricorder must now undergo rigorous clinical testing before a winner can be declared, and science fiction can take one step closer to reality.
I believe we're heading towards a future in which we're going to meet the basic needs of every man, woman, and child on this planet.
Yes, okay.
We're making the Star Trek universe happen.
I'll spread it open, obviously.
It's the most exciting time ever to be alive.
At the EMP Museum of Pop Culture in Seattle, it's an exciting time for the fans because Brooke's 50th anniversary Star Trek exhibition is ready to open.
Oh my God.
For the last 4 months, EMP Museum curator Brooke Speck has been on a hunt for props and authentic replacement lights for Chekhov's console.
If we do our job right, and if all goes well, this is going to be an incredibly immersive and a very exciting space to be in, and the closest they could possibly come to actually being in Star Trek.
Time for the fans' verdict.
I'm really excited about this Star Trek exhibit. Been a fan since freshman year of high school, and I'm hella pumped.
I saw the first episode back in 1966. I was 16 then. I'm 66 now, and I'm really excited about this exhibit.
This exhibit is really exciting for me. It's really important to me that they get the feeling of Star Trek right.
These are the first fans in nearly 50 years to see the bridge of the Starship Enterprise recreated with the authentic props.
Here, we're gonna walk. You're fine.
Ready or not, time for the big reveal.
Wow.
Oh my God. Oh, this is fabulous.
This is amazing.
It's beautiful.
It's incredible. All the buttons, all the surfaces, everything, all the texture that you've seen 1,000 times. It's incredible to see it in person. Oh, wow. Wow, look at that.
This is so cool. I can't believe I'm here. It's just a remarkable feeling. I'm shaking. I'm just so in awe and so moved by this.
When I was a kid, all I wanted was to walk the decks of the Enterprise and to be a part of Star Trek somehow.
It's bringing tears to my eyes. This is so incredible to see it, and to see it lit up and see it living. That's the amazing part.
Fantastic. I love it.
It's just incredible. Just incredible.
The fans like it. But does it live up to the expectations of the little boy who first fell in love with the show?
9-year-old Brooks would be flabbergasted on the floor. The chance to get this close to Star Trek. Of course, 9-year-old Brooks would want to climb over there and get in and push the buttons and look in the scope and do all that stuff. I mean, I do too, but 49-year-old Brooks is a professional, so.
One who's quite happy to stay on this side of the glass. At the Smithsonian Boeing Milestones of Flight Hall, the Enterprise has made her entrance.
At the Smithsonian, I think we're always very aware that we hold these objects, these pieces of art, technology, and history on behalf of the American people, on behalf of the people of the world.
The model of the Enterprise and the props of Star Trek are more than museum artifacts. They represent the future that Star Trek invented.
It was a vision of what humans could accomplish in the future, involving a better society, better people, space travel to see other things in the galaxy and exploration. And it was a really wide-opening, positive view of what mankind could accomplish.
When we were projecting things like the tricorder, the phasers, the transporter, there was a basis in science already that could say, you know, this might happen. This could happen in the future.
With what we can do now, with 50 years of technology now, I want to know the rest of the story.
All of that technology, which was beyond, you couldn't imagine how to make it at the time. We have that now. And when you realize that the year that Star Trek was supposed to be set in, you know, we're way ahead of schedule. That's pretty thrilling.
Explore strange new worlds.
It was never a matter of would we do it, it's just a matter of when we'll do it.
Space is not the final frontier. Space is where we will meet the challenge. What we're going to learn about who we are in the universe, what's our place in the universe, who we as a species are going to become. So I think the final frontier is the human soul.
Looking up life form readings.
I am a lifelong Star Trek fan. It started when I was a little kid. My mother actually suggested I watch this show. It was on reruns every day, and I watched it on our little 9-inch black and white TV, and was immediately captivated. And I would try and make phasers and communicators out of Legos and run around the house pretending I was on a mission. Star Trek and I turned 50 the very same year, so really I feel like we're bonded that way.
These are the voyages of the Starship Enterprise.
Its 5-year mission.
To explore strange new worlds.
To seek out new life.
И новые цивилизации.
And new civilizations.
To boldly go
where no man or woman has gone before.